I heard it said this week, somebody said that every day when you learn something new, it's a good day. I thought, oh, I like that. And actually this morning, I feel like before I even got here, I learned something new. So I know already it's a good day. It's going to be a good day. And somebody said, well, it's kind of like going upstairs. When you learn something new, you're stepping up your game. So I wanted to hopefully you learned a few new things with Reverend Pat Ball last week. She talked about metaphysically interpreting a parable from Jesus. And but I thought I would, I hope I can get this to work. We didn't test it. Oh, on. That would be, you're right, it wasn't on. Hey there, I learned something new already. When you go to use a device like this, always put it and switch it on first. Sort of like rebooting your computer. So, I don't know, when you were growing up, what did you call it? Pop or soda? One soda, I heard one soda in the room. But I think, yeah, I know, it was pop for me too, but there's not a right or wrong here. But this is, actually it's going to be not a soda quiz, but a pop quiz. Last week, Pat shared, what is a parable? How do we describe a parable? You know, it was something that Jesus used a lot as a way of teaching. And how did she define it? Well, this is our standard unity it's a pop quiz. It's a story. That's good. Yeah, it's part of the answer I'm looking for. Pardon me? Story with a lesson. Yeah. So, yeah, a human story with a divine meaning. Yeah. Well, this was, if you were going to Unity School and taking classes to become a minister, this was the answer they were looking for. A parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So, what does that mean? You know, an earthly story means it's a story that's relatable. You know, it's something to do with our everyday human ordinary experience. Jesus told parables about seeds, and because he was talking to farmers or people, he told stories about catching fish or an oyster because he was talking to people who were fishing. And, you know, so he used our everyday common experience, things that we see every day. And then he said, there's always a deeper meaning to it, a spiritual meaning. You know, a heavenly meaning is seeing it from the highest perspective, through God's eyes. So you might think, well, that sounds good. I'd like to get that good stuff, that deeper meaning. How do I find that? You know, where do you dig a little deeper? You know, do I ask somebody else who's an expert? Look it up in a book? Come to Reverend Mary, what's the meaning of this? No! There's another way. I'm going to share with you a little secret way that you can find the deeper meaning in any story. Are you ready for it? This is real simple. I hope you'll remember it after today. It's just to ask the question, what else is going on here? What else could be going on here? You know, it's a story about, at one level, something's happening. You know, I got in my car, I drove here, or I saw maybe a bumper sticker in front of me, you know. But what else, you know, what else is going on here? What else could be the meaning? So here's an example. Here's another parable, and you can help me answer this. So there's a story about a bricklayer, and he was out laying bricks, and somebody walked by and stopped and kind of noticed what he was doing and said to the guy, hey, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? And his first response was, oh, it's a job, pays the bills. You know, I've got 2 kids at home and a wife I got to feed. It's a job. But then you could ask another question. You could say, what else is going on here? What else? And he might say, well, you know, I took a career assessment test. And it turns out this work is a perfect fit for me. I'm really good at fitting the bricks in and making them all tight and firm. And plus, I like being outside and getting exercise while I'm working. And you might say, well, what else is going on here in this story? What else? Why are you doing this? And he said, well, you know, I'm building a cathedral. One day, people are going to come to this building, and their lives will be transformed. They're going to become better people because they came here. They'll be kinder and more compassionate and more generous. And the world will be a better place because their lives were transformed because they came here. So every brick I lay is building a cathedral. Wow, what a difference. What a difference that is. And so just by asking, what else? What else is possible? What else is going on here? What else? And I just want to put in a little commercial break here, that this is an example. This parable reminds me of what the integral ministry practice is all about. That we're learning to apply in our ministry. Integral ministry is an approach toward ministry that is centered on the fulfillment of purpose in people's lives, and how our spiritual community can help support that for each other and people to come. Lonnie and I are starting a study group that's going to begin meeting this Tuesday at 2 o'clock on Zoom, although you can come to church and watch it with me if you want. And if you'd like to learn more, please sign up so that we can send you the Zoom link. But ministry centered on the fulfillment of a purpose. It's more than just a job. We're not here just to make money. We're not here just because we stumbled in the door. We're here for a grander purpose, for people's lives to be transformed, and for people that are yet to come that will experience that transformation. So, end of commercial break. So today I wanted to kick off by sharing some reflections on the book that our spirit groups are using, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And how many are coming for the group? It seemed like there was a pretty good number of people and a number of people that aren't here. So I could tell when I walked in the door at the end there was a buzz in the room. It felt pretty good. And the first chapter, I love the first chapter. It says, the flowering of human consciousness. We could probably go back to that picture here. So I got some flowers here. And I love the fact that he uses flowering, and of all the things he could pick to describe human consciousness, that he sees that as a metaphor for human consciousness. And this is the thing that I learned this morning. I read The Science of Mind reading, and the reader, and maybe some of you already know this, you're much better of plant aficionado. Where's Phyllis? You know that plants move toward the light. The writer of the message today was talking about how at one point he had this really big, huge plant. And he brought it in, put it in his living room, and all the leaves were facing in one direction toward this wall opposite the window. But then he came back the next day, and he noticed that the leaves had all swayed in another direction, that they were moving towards the little bit of light that was creeping in through the window. That the leaves of the plant leans towards the light. You know, whatever direction the light is coming from, whether it's outside or there's one window that, you know, if they're over here, but they see some light coming and they lean towards the light. And that they just sort of naturally move in the direction where they will be nourished with that life-giving light. And how is that not, or for me it feels like it is the same is true for ourselves, that we have our true nature, our inner urge, he says our invisible passion calls us to lean toward the light, you know, the light of truth or the light of revelation and understanding and transformation. And I'd like to think that's maybe what prompted all of you to come here today, that this being part of our churches is leaning into the light, that having an experience where there's some illumination. Oh, I got an idea I hadn't thought about. I learned something new today, or I had a spiritual practice, and we meditated together, we sang together, we prayed together. And I was thinking that I think that's kind of what happens when a person makes the transition that we're talking about from one life to another, to living in another dimension. That it's sort of like they've grown as much as they can in their human form, and that there's this inner urging within them that knows that there's a greater light in life, that they lean into the light so that they can move into a greater dimension where they can see more clearly, where they are one with the big light. And so I see that for Bob and for Julie, that they took in as much light as they could in their human experience in life, and that they were ready to lean into getting closer to the light. So we can think about flowers. I love the flowering of human consciousness. He didn't say unfolding or running away or erasing human consciousness. Flowering. And so you might just think about, well, what are some sensations or thoughts or feelings you have when you think about flowers, or when you look at a flower? Growth makes you think about growth. Beauty. Color. Love. Spring, yeah. Spring is on the way, or spring has come. Oh, George Washington Carver. He had a conversation with the flowers. Yeah, he talked to them, and they talked back. He heard. They told him what he needed to do to help them blossom and unfold. So he listened, he talked, and then he listened. Intuitively, of course. So Eckhart Tolle says that the first recognition of beauty was one of the most significant events in the evolution of human consciousness. I don't know how he knows that, but I thought, wow, that coming upon a flower, seeing a flower that it was sort of like a breakthrough moment or a threshold moment in human consciousness. And I think flowers evoke feelings of love and joy and peace. They have kind of a sacredness about them. That he said they're ethereal. We could think of them as like messengers from another realm, a bridge between our physical world and the formless world. And some flowers carry a scent that's very delicate and can be kind of transport you to another place. So there's lots of different kinds of flowers. There's the kind of flowers, I can't stick this joke in, that everybody has on their face. There's tulips. But there's lots of other different kinds of flowers. There's some beautiful tulips I notice outside our front door, but also roses. My dad loved roses, and I remember years ago, and he loved roses, and he spent so much time tending to these rose bushes in our backyard. And he wasn't much of a gardener, but these rose bushes were really special to him. And I remember years ago I attended a memorial service at our Unity Convention, and they do this every year where they honor ministers and licensed teachers that have passed on over the past year, and maybe there'll be 20 or 30 people that are remembered at the service. And one of them was one of my classmates, and her name was Carol Rose, interestingly enough, her last name. And part of the ceremony was that they had a whole big bouquet of roses up front, and they invited someone, when they named each person that was being remembered, they invited someone who knew that person or had a relationship to that person to come up and pick a rose and hold that rose as a connection for the person that was being remembered. And I remember I was the one in the room that knew Carol Rose, so I went up and picked the rose for her, and And then later I wrote this poem. It happened on the weekend of Father's Day, which was interesting. I thought I would share this. This Father's Day, I choose to remember my father with a rose. A rose, a symbol of beauty, elegance, and love. The unfolding grace in our lives. I remember the rose bushes my father tended so lovingly in our backyard when I was young. I remember how he loved to take a single rose and put it in a little glass bowl on the table. I remember how he loved to tell the story of the gift my mother gave him when they first met, a beautiful rose she had painted on a single toothpick. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I remember the rose that a friend gave him as a parting gift. And this week I was honored to light a candle for my dear friend Carol Rose. A rose came to me and I passed it on to somebody else, and then somebody gave me their rose and it came back. Such is the nature of grace in our lives. And so I choose to remember my father with a rose. Alfred saw the rose in me. He nurtured and tended to my blossoming in many ways. And now it's my turn to do the same for others. This year, and I could say every year, I remember my father with a rose. But it just shows to me how powerful, whether it's a rose or a carnation or a tulip, that flowers embody, they carry the energy of sacredness, of love. And so Eckhart Tolle says in his book that as human consciousness was developing, it's funny that we came upon a flower, and he says it had no utilitarian value, it wasn't necessary for your survival. But over time, great spiritual teachers came to understand the beauty and the wisdom of flowers. And they directed us to accept them as teachers. And I thought, I think I'd take a little exception with him saying that about flowers not having a utilitarian purpose. I mean, some of us have used Bach flower remedies and just taking in the beauty of flowers. But, there are many, I'm going to come back to that for a minute. Jesus said, he said, contemplate the flowers. He said, look at the lilies of the field and consider how they grow. And they neither toil nor spin, they don't worry. Look at how beautiful the lilies of the field are. Even King Solomon, in all his majesty and magnificence, was not dressed as beautifully as the lilies of the field. So he was saying, look, that's an earthly parable. He's saying, look at something ordinary, maybe the lilies of the field that people would walk by every day, but contemplate the spiritual meaning of it, that, wow, the abundance, that something greater than ourselves created this beauty and this magnificence. Maybe you could say he was saying, what else is going on? And Buddha used stories about flowers a lot. There's a story about a time when he gave a silent sermon where he was holding up a flower. I don't know if this is the one that Dawn told or not, and just gazed at it. And all the listeners were gathered around, and people were getting impatient. When's he going to say something? He's just holding this flower. Finally, one person in the audience, a monk, smiled. And the Buddha said, you get it. You got it. You understand what this sermon is about. That the flower represents the beauty in our inner unfolding. And it's said that just that smile represented a realization or recognition. Have you ever, someone telling a story or something, and then kind of a smile comes across your face, like, oh, I get it, or I can relate to what they're saying, or there's a connection there, and we express it by this Oh, your face kind of lights up. You don't even have to say anything. So we're told that when you're alert and you contemplate a flower, or it could be a crystal or a bird without naming it, it becomes a window for you into the formless. That there's this inner opening, however slight, into the realm of spirit. I just love that idea. Maybe that's why spending time in nature, being out in a garden, is so good for our soul. So it's funny, as I was thinking about preparing this talk, I had also noticed that over the last few weeks, you ever notice when sometimes there's a pattern of things kind of start showing up in your life, like you hear something once and you hear it a second time, you hear it a third time. Like, oh, I guess I should pay attention. And for me, what's been showing up is a lotus flower. I mentioned that I went to a New Age metaphysical store, and I was really drawn to this little bracelet that had a lotus flower on it representing Buddhism. And then I went somewhere else, and I heard about lotus flowers, and I went somewhere else. It was like, and then we went to Baltimore, and I found myself in a gift shop, and they had these tiny little lotus flower things that you could buy and put batteries in it, and it lights up. And it came with a little book that explained all the symbolism of the lotus flower, and I thought, wow, there's a lot more to this than what I realized. But the lotus flower has become a universal symbol of peace and calm and serenity. What I didn't know about it is that they emerge out of the mud and the dirt. That this was in the little booklet that came with the little plastic lotus. You cannot grow a lotus flower on marble. You have to grow them on mud. That without mud, you can't have lotus flowers. And the mud represents our human experience, our suffering, our obstacles, our struggles in life. But out of that mud and muck, the little lotus flower pops up, breaks through the water, sits on the water and blooms and becomes beautiful. So without some struggle or struggling or suffering, we would have no way to learn to be understanding and compassionate. So there's a lot we can learn from a lotus flower. I put a little lotus flower candle here. They open by day and they close at night, so they know about resting and opening. You may be opening during the day as their way of leaning into the light. And it's said that water or mud, when it falls on the petals of the lotus flower, it just slides off, and the flower remains unaffected. So maybe that's a good lesson for us, that little disturbances in life, the mud and the muck, just if we can just let it fall off and not stick to us. When it sticks to us, we walk around, we're carrying it with us, and forget it. Let it fall off the petals and let it go. So there's a lot of wisdom in contemplating a flower, any flower. And Eckhart Tolle talks about, that all the, it seems like most of the world's great spiritual and religious traditions have a lot of things in common, whether it's Christianity and Jesus as our master teacher, or Krishna or Buddha, that he describes them as examples of humanity's early flowers. That they were, using that as a metaphor again, that they represented, an awakening in human consciousness, but kind of an advancement, that they were precursors of what is to come, and that maybe at the time that they lived, the world wasn't quite ready for a widespread flowering of human consciousness, but they were part of the seeds that is hopefully flowering more and more now. So what Eckhart Tolle, let me see what the next, oh no, I'm not ready for that yet. So, when we contemplate a flower or a bird or anything, you could pick one of these little flowers. Oh, these are roses here. What happens is that I think in our meditation, we create what Tolle calls spaciousness. a spaciousness in our consciousness, in our human experience, that this, he describes it as in the present moment, that whatever arises, don't reject it, just accept it. Be at peace with it. Be like the lotus flower that lets the muck and water fall off its leaves. And whatever arises, we just create the spaciousness to say it's all part of our human experience. And, the word emotion really could be thought of as two words, emotion. Energy in motion is what our feelings are. And feelings aren't good or bad or right or wrong. They're just energy that's come up to be embraced. And this book I've been reading talks about, did you know that emotions, when we feel them, can generally have not more than a 90-second life cycle? That when you feel it, that it passes through in 90 seconds or less. When we repress it or try to push it down, that doesn't happen. It hardens into a mood. Anger can become bitterness, or fear becomes anxiety, or sadness becomes whatever. But when we think of emotions as emotion, energy in motion, it's just waves that move through. And when we can breathe, when we can move, when we can accept, when we can express in healthy ways, when we can be calm, we just ride the wave to completion. And in 90 seconds or less, it passes through and it's gone. So Tolle says in this chapter that there's what we call the normal state of mind for most human beings, which really is kind of dysfunctional, is craziness, belief in illusion or suffering, or suffering in Buddhism, or various approaches to things. But the good news, the other insight that all the religions talk about, is radical transformation is possible. And that's the flowering of human consciousness, the wisdom to trust the process, the wisdom to learn from our experience, the wisdom to know that every, a parable aren't just the stories that Jesus told in the Bible. Parables are everything. Parables are our life story. It's our life experience. Just today, you can look at anything that's happening in your life, just a conversation with someone. It's an earthly story with a deeper meaning, with a spiritual meaning. And in the book of Revelation, we talk about a new heaven and a new earth. The new heaven is the emergence of a transformed state of human consciousness. It's finding the heavenly meaning in our earthly stories, that whatever is going on. And that's what I think the flowering of human consciousness, it's not just, it is human consciousness at large, but it starts with each one of us and our own individual consciousness. And the lotus flower is the secret of health for both our mind and our body. Sometimes we mourn the past, but it's not to be in the past or worry about the future, but live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. So I think the flowering of human consciousness comes when we learn to take our everyday experiences, or our human experiences, our earthly stories, and allow a heavenly meaning to emerge. It might be, for us, it might be like being like that plant that leans towards the light. Where is it? What experiences, or what practices, or what being around certain people that help me to feel like I'm leaning towards the light, that I'm creating the spaciousness for greater illumination in my life. Or it might be like us being like the bricklayer who finds a transcendent purpose in our everyday activity. So we're not just here making coffee or putting out food. We're creating a space for people to have an experience of community, of connecting, of being with each other, getting to know each other better, learning things about each other that, I didn't know that you have that same interest that I do, or sharing something, or maybe we could do something together. So that's a transcendent purpose. Or it might be for us being like that person who learns how to use a flower to help them meditate, practicing what Tolle calls the spaciousness and accepting all that arises without judgment, and allowing our feelings to move through that 90-second cycle to something new. So these to me are all examples of parables in our everyday lives. Jesus considered, parable is taking our earthly stories, our earthly experience, and finding the heavenly meaning. And maybe it just comes from asking, what else? What else is going on here? What else is possible? We're more than just sitting here listening to me talk, but something's going on inside your heart. We listen with our thoughts, with our hearts, with sensations in our bodies, with our intuition, our instincts. Something peeked up in me. I could do this, or I could do that. That's a connection I hadn't thought about before. So parables are living, it's a way of living to me in a way of living with that awareness that our earthly stories always have a heavenly meaning. And it's kind of fun, exciting to see what it's going to be, what's going to be revealed, what am I going to discover? Am I going to learn something new today? That plants lean toward the light, and so do we.